1960s and 70s brought about a radical change from that of previous decades. We saw the emergence of the counterculture movement, which challenged the social norms of the 1950s, resulting in an American society that had become much more socially liberal. The landmark Supreme Court case of Roe v. Wade made abortions legal, and some perceived that the birth control pill allowed for more sexual promiscuity. These changes put concern in the hearts and minds of many Americans. People began to feel like they were losing their nation as it moved farther and farther away from the teachings of the Bible.
This led to the establishment of a new group in the United States called the New Right. The New Right grew more concerned with social issues like abortion, pornography, homosexuality, and realigning the nation more with the morals of the Bible than that of economic issues. They believed that affirmative action and busing laws should be outlawed because they considered it a form of reverse discrimination. Another key aspect of the New Right's platform was that of prayer in schools. Prayer was outlawed in schools by the Supreme Court in 1962. They felt that prayer in schools was an important foundation for raising children based on biblical teachings, giving them a moral background to become more productive and moral members of American society. The New Right felt that the new liberal movement of the 60s and 70s was an attack on traditional values, and they needed to put a stop to it. They felt that their message could reduce the nation's high divorce rate, lower the number of out-of-wedlock births, encourage individual responsibility, and bring prosperity back to the nation.
The New Right paired with the Old Right, or the more fiscally minded wing of the conservative movement. The Old Right was upset over the expanded spending on so-called entitlement programs, which by 1980 had reached nearly $300 billion. These two groups together formed what is known as the Conservative Coalition. Together, these business leaders, middle-class voters, disaffected Democrats, and fundamentalist Christian groups championed the goals of the conservative movement. These goals were to shrink the size of the federal government, reduce federal spending, promote family values and patriotic ideas, strengthen national defense, and stimulate business by reducing government regulation and lowering taxes.
Religion, especially evangelical Christianity, played a key role in the growing strength of the conservative movement. The 1970s had brought a huge religious revival in which millions of Americans could tune in to watch evangelical preachers on TV. The most influential televangelists were Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and the founder of the evangelical movement, Billy Graham, who together formed a group called the Moral Majority. These Christian fundamentalists interpreted the Bible literally and believed in absolute standards of right and wrong. This group felt that liberal ideology was wrong, and America needed to shift back towards the teachings of the Bible. This quote from Jerry Falwell explains the goal of the Moral Majority. Our nation's internal problems are the direct result of her spiritual condition. Right living must be reestablished as an American way of life. Now is the time to begin calling America back to God, back to the Bible, back to morality.
All of these groups needed a single leader and a man who represented all of these ideas, and they found their man in Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was well suited to lead the gathering conservative crusade due to the fact that he was born and lived his core years before the upheavals of the 1960s. Reagan moved to Hollywood to work in the film industry as an actor in the 1940s. While acting, he first dipped his toe into politics by becoming president of the Screen Actors Guild. Then, in 1964, he began campaigning for Barry Goldwater at the Republican convention, which brought him into political prominence. In 1966, Reagan ran and was elected governor of California.
As a reformed New Deal Democrat, Reagan denounced the activist government and the failed social engineering of the 1960s. His goal was to win over working class and lower middle class white Americans by implying that the Democratic Party had become the party of big government and the exclusive tool of minority constituents.
Keeping taxes down and big government under control encouraged creativity and economic freedom.
As a neoconservative, he championed a free market capitalism that eliminated governmental restraints from business.
The conservatives had found their candidate in a well-spoken, charming actor named Ronald Reagan. The 1980 election pitted Reagan against the incumbent Jimmy Carter, who had presided over a notoriously weak economy. In addition to a dismal track record as president, Carter lacked the charisma that oozed out of Reagan. Reagan's acting career made him the perfect campaigner, allowing him to deliver quips like this.
Let it show on the record that when the American people cried out for economic help, Jimmy Carter took refuge behind a dictionary. Well, if it's a definition he wants, I'll give him one. A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose yours. And recovery is when Jimmy Carter loses his.
His skill as an orator led his supporters to give him the nickname the Great Communicator. All of these advantages led to an electoral landslide in the election of 1980, with Reagan carrying 44 states, making him the 40th President of the United States. The conservative wave of the 1980s had begun.